Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School. And thank you so much for joining us for our Business Over Breakfast webinar series today. This past year, and it is getting up to be almost a year, has really stretched all of us individually, on our teams, within our organizations, for some of us within our families. And many of us have found ourselves exercising our leadership skills, whether it be in formal roles or informally among our colleagues. Regardless of title or formal authority, though, the best leaders share some common traits. They inspire confidence, they listen actively, they practice humility, and they influence effectively, among other things. Identifying and honing these skills can better prepare us to lead across a wide variety of contexts, whether in times of change, crisis, or growth. This morning, our presenter, Jamie Turner, who is an expert on how most effective leaders operate within teams and organization, is going to explore with us the topic of the unspoken rules of leadership. So I'm assuming those are the ones that I didn't just point out. Jamie is an adjunct professor at Goizueta Business School, teaching in both the MBA and undergraduate programs, and is an internationally recognized author, professor, and speaker. He specializes in leadership, management, and persuasion, and is the co-author of several business books, including How to Make Money with Social Media, Go Mobile, and Digital Marketing Growth Hacks. He is the founder of 60secondmarketer.com, has a new YouTube series called In 60, which I've been watching, Jamie, which was designated as one of the top 8 business YouTube channels in the nation. And if that doesn't keep him busy enough, he's also a regular guest on CNN and HLN and has been highlighted in Forbes, Entrepreneur Magazine, Business Insider, and the Wall Street Journal. He is also, and this is one of the things I found really fascinating, the co-founder of a not-for-profit called A School Bell Rings that seeks to improve access to education for impoverished children around the globe. And I'd love to hear more about that. Suffice to say, we're very fortunate to have Jamie with us this morning to share his expertise and insights with all of us. Jamie wants this to be a very interactive session, and he's excited to engage with all of us through chat and the Q&A function throughout the presentation. So please post your thoughts, post your questions as we go, and he will address them along the way, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions or answered as we can today. And if leadership is an area of particular interest for you and you're considering developing and honing your skills in leadership, there are a couple of upcoming executive education programs that I invite you to check out. One is emotional intelligence, which we hear from surveys and market research of CHRO and chief learning officers as being the most important thing at the moment for leaders in their organization. So emotional intelligence starts March 2nd, and executive communication and leadership presence starting April 12th. As usual, at the end of today's session, there is a short survey, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share your feedback. So enjoy the morning with Jamie, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you next week. And we hope you find this session very insightful. Thank you.
Awesome. Terrific. I am thrilled to be here. I'm going to ask everybody to go into the chat feature and just name the city that you were born in or that you grew up in, just to get us comfortable and used to using that chat. Jennifer's from Atlanta, which is awesome. We've got more Atlanta. Amy, Sandy, Sean. Let's see. Boy, that's going fast. That's awesome. Orlando, Memphis, Denver, Atlanta. Someplace named Issaquah or something like that. But look at that. We've got people from all over the country and South Africa. So that's terrific. And that's awesome. And one of the reasons why I wanted you to do that was to be able to help us start using the chat feature. I'm going to monitor questions as they come in as much as I can. Ashley and Christina and Nicola are going to be doing the same thing so that in case I miss something that's an important question, we'll be able to do that. But it's great to see Kira, Virginia, Joseph, Lynn, all the folks from all over the place. I am going to go in and start sharing my screen here, and we will talk today about the unspoken rules of leadership. Now, here's the reason why we call it the unspoken rules of leadership. And the reason is because these are the tips and techniques that you learn through going through a ton of different things all along. So basically, it's what you do throughout your career that isn't taught in textbooks, isn't taught in anything like that. Now, I also have to make sure that I can see the chat feature. So give me 1 second here so that I can open up the chat and do that here. I am going to be monitoring the chat as well as it looks like the Q&A is coming in a little bit easier for me there. So here's what I'm going to do. Let me just get the chat feature going here. Boom. Now I can see it. Awesome. Now I'll be monitoring the chat feature, not necessarily the Q&A, but the chat feature. So if you do have a question as we go on and want to ask a question while we're going through this presentation, please do so in the chat. More than happy to go ahead and do that. Let's dive in and talk about what Harvard tells us about leadership. This is something from Harvard Business Review. It reports that only 5% of our leadership ability is driven by our cognitive ability. Now, here's what's interesting about that. If you go on, 53% of our leadership ability is driven by our maturity, ambition, sociability, and curiosity. So it's not necessarily our IQ or our smarts that get us to be good leaders. It's actually our ability to be mature, ambitious, sociable, and curious. That's what keeps us going. So the question for everybody here today is, are you mature, ambitious, sociable, or curious? And of course you are. So we're going to learn some tips and techniques that are going to help you be a better leader. Let's talk about a question I want you to ask yourself. How would you like to change your life in business? Just think about that for a second. What would you like to do in business to change your life? And those are the key things that we're going to talk about today. Do you want to get the promotion that you've always wanted, that you felt like, hey, somebody else got that promotion, I wish I had gotten that? Do you want to win the new client that you think would be really beneficial for your company? Or do you want to lead teams more effectively? It doesn't matter what you want to do. These are things that you can do in order to become a better leader. And we're going to talk about each one of these things so that you can ultimately do it. Now, here's what I want you to do. We're going to do a little sort of challenge, a mental challenge here. As we go through today's presentation, I'm going to ask you to open up your mind and be flexible in how you approach things. Because if you're like most people, you've solved problems the same way throughout your career, and you kind of get in a rut. I know everybody's sitting there going, yeah, I do kind of get in a rut every once in a while. So part of my journey here with you today is to open up your mind and get your brain to be a little bit more flexible. We're going to start with an exercise that'll get your mental flexibility going so that you're open-minded about some of the things we're going to talk about today. Take a look at these glasses of water. There's 3 on the left, half full, half full, half full, and then 3 on the right, empty, empty, empty. By only touching one glass, I want you to move them around or do something with the glass so that you make it half full, half empty, half full, half empty, half full, half empty. So just think about that quiz, and in the chat feature, just raise your hand, say, I got it. Don't give the answer, just say, I got the answer. And then I'll call on you as we go through it. So you're supposed to take it and make the glasses go half full, empty, half full, empty, half full, empty, going left to right. Think about the problem for a little bit. See if you can do it. Okay, good. We've got a few. Wow, look at that. This is a smart crowd. Look at that. Look at how many people got it right off. I got to tell you, truth be told, I didn't get it. When I did this thing, this was done to me, I was like, I have no clue how to do that. But looks like we've got a lot of people in there. Deborah Smith, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and tell us what the answer is, and go ahead and type it in there. Looks like Larry might have done it for you, but that's cool. Yes, the answer is you take the second one from the left and pour it in to the second one to the right. And that ultimately makes it go half full, empty, half full, empty, half full, empty. So that was really just designed to get your brain warmed up. You got 2 choices here. Do this exercise to make your brain more flexible, or drink more coffee, or do both, and you'll be able to follow along. Let's keep going and talk about what we're going to do today. I have developed something called the 4 pillars of leadership. This is a true story. I was sitting down, I did this presentation a couple of years ago, came off the stage, somebody came up and said, I love the tips you gave. I thought you'd have a framework that sort of helped us organize the tips that you've got. And I said, that's a great idea. So I sat down literally at Waffle House one morning, the whole story, the story, you get a napkin, you get a pen, borrow it from the server, and then you also go in and start mapping things out. And so I started mapping things out, trying to put it into a 2x2 so that we could basically figure out how to put these into categories. And I realized all of the tips I'm going to share with you today, if you go to the left side of the matrix, it's one-to-one, things that you do one-to-one, versus on the right side of the matrix, one-to-many. And then from the top, you do things that are outward, and at the bottom, things that are inward, things that you tell yourself versus things that you tell others. And it worked out really perfectly. So we're going to start today with the bottom left, which is mindset. One-to-one, inward, what you tell yourself. These are the things that you tell yourself in order to be a better leader. Then we're going to move up to the green box, which is mentoring. One-to-one, outward, what you tell others. If anybody on here is a coach, then, or a mentor or a team leader, then you're going to want to focus on that box. Bottom right, we'll move to, which is management, the purple box. Inward, what you tell yourself if you're going to be talking one-to-many. And then the upper right is outward, what you tell others if you're talking one-to-many, the yellow box being marketing. So we're going to go mindset, mentoring, management, marketing. Let's dive in. I know somebody asked, will the PowerPoint be distributed to participants? That's fine with me. You can email me. I'll have my email at the end, or you can ask the folks that are kindly hosting this for it, and that's okay. Also, David said, curious, not seeing all replies here and cannot seem to choose all panels. So I'm going to let somebody answer that in case that's a logistical question, but I'm going to keep moving on what we're talking about here. Let's start with mindset. So many people go in and think, I got to work on all of my executive skills. The first thing that you have to work on in truth is your mindset. So let's talk about that. Leaders understand that they control their thoughts and their actions, but they cannot control the outcome. If you think about that, you can control how you think and you can control how you act. And when you release yourself from the outcome, it prevents you from being a micromanager. So the key to being an effective leader is to start thinking the right thoughts and make sure that they are sound, ethical, pure, proper, everything working on that front. Then control your actions. And remember, anytime you're confronted with a situation, you've got a few choices. Generally, it's two places you can go. You can go negative or go positive. And if you choose the positive route, the ethical, proper, great, kind, win-win scenarios that you do, then you'll end up having positive outcomes in everything that you do. So remember, leaders understand that they can control their thoughts and their actions, but they can't control the outcome. Now, also, next slide, effective leaders work on their mindset first and their skill set second. That's something that's counterintuitive. We always think, I got to learn the new technology. I got to learn Excel. I got to learn how to use this program. I got to learn all these things. But the truth is that effective leaders work on their mindset first and their skill set second. So I'm going to encourage everybody coming out of this to start focusing on how you think in order to make sure that how you behave as a leader improves, because the starting point is how you think. Here's an interesting one. Effective leaders have an appropriate complaint to action ratio. Now, this is something I learned by reading a great book. It was the autobiography of Maurice White, who founded Earth, Wind, and Fire, one of the great bands of all time. And Maurice White actually started Earth, and Wind, and Fire twice. He started with his first band, and he realized that that band, all the folks in the band had a lot of complaints, and they didn't take action on the complaints. And he realized, these guys sit around and complain a lot, but then they don't do anything to change it. So what he did was he fired that band, hired a new band, and made sure that their complaint to action ratio was different. You should complain, that's fine. Everybody has to vent, everybody has to think out loud, everybody has to talk about things, but your actions should outweigh your complaints by a factor of 10-1. And if you do that, you'll realize that effective leaders have an appropriate complaint to action ratio. So take action on what you do. Don't just complain. Here's a counterintuitive concept that I want to share with you. My sister brought this up to me. She said she has a friend who has done very well for himself. He's worth gazillions of dollars. She goes out to dinner with him all the time. And as he's gotten older, his world is starting to shrink. She'll call him up, say, let's go meet for dinner. He says, okay, but we got to meet at 4. And she's like, why 4 p.m.? Well, because I want to beat the crowd. She's like, really? 4 p.m.? He's like, yep, that's the only time I'm going to eat dinner. She says, okay, I'll meet you at whatever restaurant for. He says, no, we got to eat at the Chinese restaurant at the foot of my building. Why? Because that's the only restaurant I eat at, because that's the only food I like. So his world is starting to shrink. So my sister pointed out this counterintuitive thought. When you move towards comfort, your world shrinks. When you move towards discomfort, your world expands. Keep that in mind. When you feel uncomfortable, that's a good thing. And let me give you an example. When the young person walks into your office and says, you got to learn this new software program. And now if you're like me, you're going, oh my gosh, yet another software program I got to learn. That little bit of discomfort will help you expand your world. So move towards discomfort and move away from comfort, because when you get too comfortable in things, you get stale, things get redundant, you start solving problems the same way you've always solved them. My goal here for you today is to show you how to expand your mind, think different thoughts, and to move towards discomfort so you can have that mild discomfort that comes with expanding your world. Here's another thing as we're working on mindset. And by the way, down in the bottom left-hand side, you can see a little box that says mindset. Anytime that we're talking about any slide here, just go down to the bottom left and you'll see where we are in those 4 little boxes that we started the program with. Right now we're in mindset, which is the first quadrant on the bottom left. But here's an interesting idea. Leaders know that their choices are more important than their circumstances. A lot of times we all fall into the trap of saying, well, if I was just this person or that person, I'd have it a lot easier and my life would be easy. But the reality is that leaders know that their choices are more important than their circumstances. Now, remember one thing that is a great thought that Stephen Covey mentioned, and I forget who he got it from, but it was an ancient thought that he repackaged. Oh, no, I know who he got it from, was the guy who wrote, I'll think of the book in a second, and somebody, if you recognize this thought, put it in the chat feature. But it was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, great book. Viktor Frankl realized that there is a space between stimuli and response, and how you handle yourself in that space dictates your life. So you get a stimuli, your boss comes in the office mad, or you have something happen to you at the office. That space between the stimuli and the response, that little microcosm of a moment where you decide how to respond to that, can change your life. So that's why I go back to one of the first things we talked about. Great leaders understand that their thoughts lead to actions, which lead to positive outcomes. And if you remember that, then you can do a great idea from Viktor Frankl, picked up by Stephen Covey a little bit later. Let's keep going, but let's pause for a second. Leaders know that their choices are more important than their circumstances. Now, here's an interesting thing. There are new perspectives on leadership. The New York Times did an article not too long ago that basically said, for years, you've been told that the following traits are the sign of a great leader: grit, drive, pride, confidence, boldness, all of those things that in the United States we kind of hold up as, look at all the fortitude that person has, and they push through everything. But there's one new thing that's starting to come on board. And I'm going to see if people know. Put in the chat feature, what trait is a trait that is a new trait that people are starting to realize is a powerful trait for, oh, look at you guys. Oh my God, everybody's got it. Well, empathy is a good one, but humility, you nailed it right off the bat. And Nicola even talked about it early on. Emotional intelligence, yes, important. But that humility, new research shows that there's an unwritten secret that's often overlooked, which is humility. Sitting in a room, being humble enough to listen to the data, listen to your advisors, and make decisions based on that, instead of going into a room saying, I know what we're going to do, here's what we're going to do, and being dictatorial. So remember that humility. And I learned that from 2 bosses I once had. They were both ran a company. They were always the 2 smartest people in the room. They were also the 2 most humble. And I watched them do it for a decade, and I was like, that is a trick that a lot of people don't realize. But that sense of humility and walking into a room, even when you're the smartest person in the room, and saying, I'm here to listen, and I'm here to get at your advice, And then I'm also here to make the final decision and live with the outcome, but I'm going to be humble moving into it. Here's a really big thing. Now, I've got a document I'll share with anybody who wants it. I'll give you my email address at the end that teaches you how to meditate. But meditation has both long and short-term physical benefits on the brain. Regular meditation leads to increased gyrification, which is more folds in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where we have executive reasoning and thinking ahead on things, and that helps us go forward with things that work out great. If you want to learn more about it, you can email me at this email. I'll send you a 3-page document that teaches you how to meditate. But here's the thing about meditation. I went into I've been actually meditating, no lie. I started meditating when I was a teenager. I was 13 when I started meditating, and it's worked great for me. But when I was in my mid 30s, I hadn't really done it in depth. When I was in my mid 30s, I went into a doctor. I said, "Hey doc, I need to get on Ritalin or something like that because I've got ADHD and I just need to sort of settle my brain down." And the doctor said, "I can put you on a medicine if you want, but the truth is, do you meditate?" And I said, "Yeah, actually I meditate, every so often, just to relax." And he said, "Here's what I want you to do. I want you to meditate twice a day and see what impact that has on you." And I started doing it twice a day and went in, and in the morning and then after lunch, I meditate. And all of a sudden what happens is your brain, when you do it regularly like that, kicks into the alpha state. The alpha state settles the brain down, and all that monkey chatter that we all have those voices in our brain that are going, "Don't forget to pick up the groceries on the way home. And by the way, you got to get more gas. And how am I going to handle that person in the office?" All that monkey chatter goes away and settles down. It's a great way to settle your brain so you can be more focused and more persistent in what you do. It's a great way to do it. So anyway, if anybody wants it, just email me at the end of this. But first, we're going to have a quiz. Fill in the chat feature. The quiz. Harvard Business Review reports that only 5% of our leadership ability is driven by our blank ability. Good. Melanie got it. Zach, sorry you missed that one. That's okay. You tried. Howard got it. Everybody's getting it. Jeanette got it. Anthony got it. Joseph got it. Oh, yeah. Except Joseph, it's spelled, Michael, it's spelled cognitive, not synodative. But anyway, long story short is that's correct. You got the answer right. Harvard Business Review reports that only 5% of our leadership ability is driven by our cognitive ability. Next bullet point, effective leaders work on their mindset first and their blank second. Put it in the chat feature, see what we got. Good. Skill set. Marsha got it. Zach got it. Awesome. Lisa got it. Keisha got it. Terrific. Peg got it. Awesome. Terrific. You guys are great students. You're learning what we're talking about. Let's go to the third one. When you move towards blank, your world shrinks. When you move towards blank, your world expands. When you move towards blank. Good. Excellent. Look at that. We've got a bunch of people. Good. Comfort and discomfort. Exactly. That's the answer. Terrific. So y'all are listening and you're processing and you're able to apply it. By the way, when I teach at Emory University, also at the University of Texas, I always tell people a couple of things in the audience. I always say, take handwritten notes on what I'm about to say to you. Don't type them in, because they've seen that when you take handwritten notes, your brain actually has to process what the professor's saying and put it into your brain first, and then use shorthand to write it out in shorter sentences on your sheet of paper, as opposed to typing where you're really just taking dictation. And so the first thing I always say is write notes. The second thing I always say is go back, read the book. And the third thing I always say is go teach what you've learned to your roommate. When you can teach things, that's when you really know something in depth. So use that process if you want to learn how to sort of really take things in. Write it down handwritten, read it again, and then go teach it to somebody, and that'll really etch it into your brain. Now let's move on to the next thing, which is mentoring. This is stuff you say one-to-one to somebody else. So if anybody here is a team leader or a coach or a mentor, or even just has one-to-one conversations, it can even be with your spouse or your significant other. These are the things that you can do in order to have a more effective relationship with them and actually have a win-win scenario come out of it. Now, the very first thing we're going to tell you is to think backwards. Thinking backwards is to get inside the mind of the person you're talking about or talking to, and work backwards from there. Understand what their motivations are, what their desires are, what their aspirations are. Once you understand that, you can work backwards from there and then coach them and mentor them much better. Let me tell you two stories, quick stories on this. I had a friend who was going into Accenture to interview for a job. The person interviewing said, what do you want to be doing in 5 or 10 years? Now, the standard answer is, oh, I want to be working at Accenture the rest of my life. This person was honest and said, you know what, in 5 or 10 years, I want to be retired in Mallorca, a little island off the coast of Spain. That's what I want to do. And the person from Accenture was smart enough to say, let's make that happen for you. They didn't say, oh, no, we only want people who are going to want to be CEO, all that sort of stuff. They said, let's make that happen for you. What that person did was they got inside the mind of my friend and said, you know what? You've got a life that you want to have happen, something happen. So we're going to make that happen for you. Let's talk about getting you employed here. Another time, you'll go in and you'll see that people need to understand that you are on their side. So if you're mentoring and coaching, let me give you an example. If you go in and you've got a young employee that you've got to teach them something and they keep screwing up, you can go in and you say, hey, listen, last time we talked about how in 5 or 10 years, you want to have your own business. You want to own your own business and run the show. And they go, yeah, I do. Excellent. Today, I want to talk to you about how you need to behave in order to reach that, because you missed your deadline, you came in over budget, and the work quality wasn't what we were expecting. And if you want to be an entrepreneur and run your own business, you're going to have to meet budgets, get the work done on time, and have high quality work. So let's talk about how you can do that here so that in 5 years, you're doing it there. So that's the idea. Think backwards and work from there. Here's 5 mistakes that can kill employee engagement. I know all of us have experienced people we work with that do this. They have erratic expectations or favoritism that'll kill engagement with employees very, very quickly. Micromanagement, distractedness, burnout, all of those things add up to employees just kind of becoming disengaged. And your job as a leader is to spot these things and to put them out so that there's no favoritism, no erratic expectations, or even spot the burnout and tell people, hey, go in and relax, and we want you to take a little bit of time off, or whatever it is. I had a friend of mine once tell me, when you go through your career, there are periods, where you'll go through 6 weeks where you're just, not feeling it. You're just sort of, not really feeling inspired, but then you come out of that. It's just a natural cycle. So there's a difference between the natural cycle of just sort of slowing down a little bit for a little period of time before you get re-energized, and actual burnout. I guarantee you there are a lot of people who have had burnout on this. I know I've gone through it twice in my career. It's a real thing. You got to sort of step back and then re-engage. Let's keep going. Here's a really terrific communication styles matrix that I want to teach. It was developed by Dr. Eileen Russo, and it's a great way to understand how people communicate. And the key thing is to understand how you communicate, but more importantly, it's to understand how the other person communicates, because you have to adapt your style to the other person's style. So if you're very sort of, let me cut to the chase and let me get down to the facts real quickly, and you're talking with somebody who's a feeling, emotional person, that's going to be a conflict that doesn't work out. So it's important to understand what your style is, but it's also important to understand the style of the person you're talking to so that you can then talk to them in the language that they want to be spoken to. Let's talk about that right now and look at it. You can take a look at this 2x2. On the left side is low expressiveness. On the right side is high expressiveness. And the bottom is low assertiveness. At the top is high assertiveness. This is sort of the matrix that Dr. Eileen Russo developed, and it's a really good one. If you start in the bottom left, if you're low expressive, if you don't express yourself, if you're kind of numbers oriented and analytical, and also you're not very assertive, you're very systematic in your communication skills. Typically, you'll go through things very, very sort of specifically. Let's talk about this in a logical, orderly fashion. If you were at the top, high assertiveness and low expressiveness, that's somebody who's very bold, but they don't express themselves. They're very direct. They just get to the point quickly, boom, they tell you, and they move on. And then they don't understand why they've offended everybody, right? Because we've all seen people do that, where they come in and they just speak exactly what's going on, and they walk out of the office and you're like, oh my God, what just happened to me? That's because they're direct and they didn't manage the way they speak in order to work with the person they're talking to. Bottom right is considerate. That's low assertiveness and high expressiveness. So a lot of times these are people who are very easy to get along with. They don't want to rock the boat. They're very emotional, or they feel a lot. They feel more than most people. That's the considerate category. And then in the upper right is spirited, high assertiveness and high expressiveness. So in the chat feature, I want you to write down where you are. Are you systematic, direct, considerate, or spirited? Kim is direct. That's cool. That's great. Spirited. Mackenzie is in there. Sarah is spirited. Rio is spirited, it looks like. Keisha, I missed that. It's going so fast, but that's great. I'm really glad y'all are using this chat feature, because don't forget, you can ask me any questions. If there are questions you have about a slide that I'm talking about, feel free to do that. If there are logistical questions like, will these slides be shared later on, I'll let the team handle that. But if there are questions about a slide, I'll pause and answer them. So Nika asks, what's my communication style? I am going to be in the spirited side of the equation. I'm very expressive and somewhat assertive, and I have to work on that, because a lot of times I'll get down and I will like meet somebody very and just get to the point very quickly in a very sort of upbeat and optimistic manner. And sometimes people don't want that. Sometimes people want to sort of get to know you first and ease their way into things. So that's great. So let's keep going and move on this, and we'll go on to the next thing, which is the question that I just asked: what style are you? Now, here's an interesting thing. What surrounds us influences our perception. Here's a story that happened to me when I was younger. I had my boss walk into my office, and she was very nervous. She comes in, by the way, this is back in the day when we actually had offices, right? Who remembers those days? You got to be old like me to remember that. But I was like a rookie junior employee. I had my own office. I even had an assistant at the very beginning. Those days are gone. But you walk into the office. She walks into my office, very nervous. She says, can I close the door? And I said, yeah, go ahead and close the door. And I was like, oh my God, here, she's about to, cut me out and fire me. And she says, I got to talk to you about something. I said, okay, go ahead. And she said, what I want to talk to you about is your raise. We're going to give you a really good raise this year. And I was like, oh my gosh, why did you talk to me that way? I was so nervous because I was in this environment that was influencing my perception of what was about to happen. So I use this slide as a way to make that point. If you look at A and B, you probably think the color on A, the main color on A, is different from the main color on B. But the reality is that the colors are actually the same. That's actually the same shade of gray. And so here's what I want you to think about. The reason we think of the B as being lighter than on A is because on where it's shaded is because of what surrounds B. B is in an environment where it looks like a light shining on it, but I just showed you A and B are actually the same color. So just keep that in mind. What surrounds us influences our perception. So it's your job, if you go in to talk to an employee or somebody you're coaching, to calm them down and make sure that they understand everything's going to be done. You can do that two ways. One is the indirect approach, which is you come in and you keep your voice calm and you sort of maybe tell a joke or ease into the conversation, how you been, all that sort of stuff, and relax them. The other way is just be direct with them. I used to have a boss who said, come on in my office, and he'd say, nothing urgent, I just want to ask you a question. And that's the way the conversation would start, because that person wanted me to know this isn't anything to worry about. This is just something I got to talk to you about that's not urgent. We have a question from Ashley, Ashley dropped it in. Another question from the Q&A. How do you move away from systematic? We're going to address that a little bit later because that jumps back to some slides. So that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And then we're going to talk about that. And then Larry says, once you identify yours, what tips are there for managing the conflicts between communication styles? Well, let me jump back because it seems like people are interested in this topic. This is jumping back to this, which is where you are, and you have to move into where you go. I actually have a YouTube video that goes into in depth on how to handle these things. And if you email me afterwards, I'll send you a link to the YouTube video. It's about an 8-minute video that's about communication styles. It takes this matrix, but it goes in and it says, if you're direct, here's what you generally do. And if you're talking to somebody who's systematic, here's how you need to speak to them. And so it's really literally just getting inside the mind of those people that you're talking to. So I hope that helps. Just shoot me an email and I'll send you a link to the video. How vocal emphasis impacts our leadership. Now, a lot of times people don't realize that how you use your voice telegraphs to people how to respond to things. Now, a couple of things you may have noticed that I've done in this online presentation. One is I change my volume every once in a while. I'll go soft a little bit. I'll go loud a little bit. That's intentional, because what happens when you change your volume is people actually lean in and listen to things when you change your volume a little bit. The other thing I do is I change my tempo. You may have noticed that sometimes I'll pause, and I do that intentionally. And it's again designed to get your brain to engage and go, hey, I'm not listening to this monotone thing. Then I also work on my tone and my texture. Pitch is one thing. You want to lower your voice as much as possible and speak from your diaphragm. That makes people feel more comfortable. And you also want to work on your tone, which is sort of the resonance of your voice. It's a little harder for people to do that if in some cases, but that's one of the things you do. But let's talk about how vocal emphasis impacts our leadership. Take a look at this sentence. It's the same sentence, but how we emphasize certain words changes the meaning of the sentence. So we have 7 different meanings. I didn't say he borrowed my book. 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 Now, all of those things have different meanings based on what you emphasize. So keep that in mind as you move forward on things, how you use your voice in order to impact your leadership. Good leaders understand that their voice has subconscious communication skills that go out and help people understand what's going on. Now, we're going to do another mind flexibility thing here. Warm up your brain by moving one toothpick. I want you to go ahead and create a word out of what you see here. Now, you're only allowed to move one toothpick, but it will create a word. So go ahead and move one toothpick. Good. Shanice got it right off the bat. Deborah got it. Good. Thomas got it. Win. If you take the right hand toothpick, the orange one, and move it over to the left side, it spells win. Here's an interesting thing. Somebody already got it here. Aim. I did this the other day and somebody said aim. And I was like, aim? I don't know how you get aim. And they explained that, let me see, how do you get aim? Oh, I know. You move the third toothpick from the left, you just throw it away and it spells aim. And I hadn't spotted that. So Jessica got that. A couple other people got that. That's awesome. So there's 2 words that you can spell across this, and that really works out. Now, again, my goal here is to open up your mind, get your brain to be more flexible, and I think that will work out terrifically for you. So let's move on to management, which is what you tell yourself if you need to lead a team. These are management skills that you can learn so that you can go in and talk about things. Now, there are 4 kinds of leaders. I'm talking about the leaders at the top of companies here. There are people who provide a vision, which is why I have a picture of Steve Jobs, people who provide data, people who provide warmth, and people who provide details. Now, if you're not the CEO or the founder of the company, let's talk about that, because most of us are managers or leaders or team leaders. You do almost always want to have some sense of a vision, because you have to show your team where you're headed. So the first one of those, you always have to have that. Hey folks, here's where we are. Our goal is to increase sales 6% this quarter. Here's the vision that we're going to do that. And by the way, don't forget, when you paint a picture of the outcome of that vision for your staff, it's easier for them to grasp and stay focused on it. So don't just say we got to increase sales 6%. You have to have a vision. we're going to inspire our sales team with new sales promotions and get our marketing team all rowing in the same direction so that we can accomplish our goal of a 6% sales increase. So that's painting a picture. So vision is always important. The other three usually are subcategories that you're going to want in there. Do you provide data as part of your vision? That's fine. Or do you provide warmth as part of your vision? That's fine too. Or do you provide details as part of your vision? All of those are fine. There's no secret sauce. There's no one way to do it. But if you're somebody who is one of those more spirited people that we talked about before, and you have a lot of warmth in you, then you're going to want a vision and use your warmth in order to inspire people to do it. Gary just asked about trust. Actually, it's interesting you talk about trust, Gary, because I think that's one of the next slides coming up. We're going to talk about trust, but yes, a leader always has to instill trust by living what they preach. And that's one of the key things. If you take away trust, people aren't going to believe you no matter what your vision is. So you have to actually follow through on what it is you're saying so that people can learn to trust you. Here's another interesting thing. Some leaders think that if you take something simple and make it complex, you're smart. The truth is that intelligent people take complex things and make them simple. Now that's counterintuitive. I'm an academic. I live in the world of academics. I love academics. I admire them greatly. But one of the things that drives me crazy is that they take simple things and make them complex. And I'm writing a book right now. It's going to be published by McGraw-Hill in September. And my co-author tends to use big words. And I'm like, we don't need big words. What we want is for this book to be understood by somebody who's lying in bed at night, reading the book after a long day at work, and we want it to be easy to understand, not complex. So I'm going to encourage you to use simpler language. And here's where I learned this technique. I used to sit in meetings, and my boss used to sit around and say, hey, here are 3 things that we need to remember coming out of this meeting. And she was always very good at simplifying things. And I remember thinking, that's a sign of intelligence when she takes complex things and simplifies it so people can remember it. Ray says, if you cannot explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it. Agree. That's a great idea. Ray, I just mentioned that I'm writing this book, and with my co-author, I actually said, this is a complex subject. If we don't simplify this so that it can be read and understood by a high schooler, we're not doing our job. So absolutely, you got to sort of simplify things. And that does not mean dumb it down. That means simplify it. So I'm going to read a couple of comments here because a lot of things are coming in. These are good. Let's see. Paula says, a professor once said, why use a dime when a penny would work? That is great. Denise says, complex to simple is essential to the doctor/patient relationship in almost every situation. Think about that, Denise. Totally agree. A doctor knows all these things. If you talk in doctor language to a patient, medical school language, you're going to confuse the patient. You got to sit down and explain it in simple terms. Again, we're not talking about dumbing down. We're just talking about simplifying in order to make it digestible and, most importantly, memorable. Because if you have people walk away and they don't remember what you said, you're not actually doing your job. Let's keep going here. Good leaders don't get distracted by sideways energy. Sideways energy, we're all guilty of it. Sideways energy is working on a PowerPoint presentation and seeing a little red circle with a new email that comes up and goes, ding, you got a new email. And you go in and you say, oh, let me just check that email. I'll go away from the PowerPoint for a second, check the email, because it's only going to take me 30 seconds to check it. But guess what happens? There are switching costs that happen when your brain has to switch from one task to another task. It uses energy and it slows our process down. So whenever you see that sideways energy come up, whether it's checking emails, just a quick one email, I'm going to check it and get it out of my inbox, or if it's going to the water cooler, back in the days when we would all huddle around the water cooler, we don't anymore, but going off and having that sideways conversation that's gossipy. Now, let me just pause there for a second. We all need to vent. We all need to sort of say, can you believe that this person did that or whatever? That's just normal human nature. And it actually helps us get centered and sort of get it off our chest. But if you find yourself being sucked into that a lot, that's sideways energy that's not moving you forward on your goal. Printis says, outstanding presentation thus far. I hope the recording will be available for review later. Yes, it will. Thank you for the kind words there. And yes, it is going to be available and the slides will be available as well. Let's keep going here and talk about the next thing. The number one mistake people make with email. I see all the time this mistake being made with email. It's this. We all work in environments, right, where we have to build consensus on things. Now, let's say you're at a company and you're in a meeting and there's 15 people in the meeting. And in the meeting, you say, you know what, we're trying to make a decision whether we make green widgets next year or blue widgets next year. And you're convinced that you got to make green widgets, but nobody makes a final decision. Now you come out, here's the mistake. You come out of the meeting, you send an email to all 15 people that's long and going out to 15 people saying, here's why we need to do green widgets next year. Two things happen. Number one, nobody reads the email because nobody reads emails that are long. If you are starting to write paragraphs in your email, it's too long because none of us have time to read paragraphs. And there's just something about reading a paragraph that doesn't actually, on a screen, that doesn't actually resonate. So you have to do short sentences. But here's the main thing. If you want to build consensus to do green widgets next year, you have to start one-on-one with an email to the people who are most likely to agree with you. So you take the 3, 4, or 5 people, shoot them a one-on-one email and say, hey, Ashley, I think we should do green widgets next year. Do you agree? Ashley goes, yeah, that actually makes sense. Then you go to the next person. Hey, Christine, I think we should do green emails next year, green widgets. Hey, does that make sense? And you build consensus. Then you work your way up to the more and more challenging people to convince. You're going to get to that middle section where now you can say, hey, Ashley, Christine, and Nicola all said that we should make green widgets. I agree, we should make green widgets. What do you think? And you work on those people and you build consensus as you go up, ultimately being able to say, hey, we've got 10 of the 15 people in the meeting agreeing that we should make green widgets next year. Let's do it. So that's the number one mistake people make with email is make sure that you're doing it. Gary says the art of negotiation. Oh, David, Japanese call this nimawashi. Very interesting. I did not know that. I'm gonna take that and drop it into the presentation, David. I love that. So anyway, people are really understanding this point that you have to negotiate and work your way up. Let's go to the last one, which is marketing. We're rounding the bend here. We got about 10 minutes left. We're gonna leave 5 minutes at the end for any questions that come through. Ashley's gonna monitor that and read the questions out loud so that we can go ahead and do that. Let's talk about marketing, which is one-to-many, outward, what you tell others. This can be, hey, I run a company and I've got 100 employees or 200 employees, or it can be, hey, we need to package up our messaging about our company so that our customers, which are in the millions, can understand what we're about. So you can use some of these techniques in sales, marketing, all sorts of things. Now, if you're in a small situation, you want to lead a meeting properly. Basically, what you're going to do there is be clear about what kind of meeting it is. Remember, there's multiple kinds of meetings. There's brainstorming, planning, setting the course. So you have to start the meeting like that. Here's a great tip that I just love. Over prepare and then relax. And that makes it so that you're comfortable and it's easy for you to do. In a presentation I did recently, somebody said, this is what actors do. Actors over prepare and know their lines so that they can be relaxed and be authentic on stage or on screen. This includes, by the way, rehearsing out loud. If you get a little nervous about presentations, rehearse the first 3 minutes out loud and yes, in front of a mirror. And I know it sounds hokey, but basically it's what happens. Here's what I do, by the way. I'll get a phone call from CNN. They'll say, can you come down to the studio this afternoon to talk about XYZ? A lot of times I don't know a lot about XYZ. So what I do is I literally sit down, write out 20 questions that they might ask me that I'm going to be able to answer. And I have my wife ask those questions to me so that I can get comfortable with my answers. Now, guess what? Do they ever ask any one of those 20 questions? No, they ask a bunch of different questions, but I'm so relaxed and know that I could handle any curveball they throw me that I'm able to do it and it works out great. So remember that tip because it's a good one. Over prepare, then relax. Every so often, pause and do a quick recap of where you are in the meeting, and then finally provide clear action steps at the end. I can't tell you how many meetings end with people not providing clear action steps. Always end with, here are 3 things we learned. By the way, the human brain works best when it does things in 3s. You can't always do 3s. You may have 5, but for some reason, if you want somebody to remember something, always remember to do it in threes. We've learned 3 things in this meeting and 3 action steps we're going to do, and do it that way. For some reason, it's called the rule of threes, and we don't know why, but the human brain works better that way. There are only 4 real objections to a sales. Michael says Jag's rule of 3 always pops up. Jag Sheth, if you're not familiar with Jag Sheth, you should be. He's a great professor at Emory and a friend of mine, and I also teach with Reshma, his daughter. There are only 4 real objections to a sale. Need, I don't need what you're selling. Money, I don't have money for this. Time, I don't have time for this. And trust, I don't trust you. Somebody mentioned earlier, trust is a big thing for a leader to have, but on these, the first 3, you don't really have a lot of control over. Number 1, I don't need what you're selling. You can't sell anybody anything if they don't need it. Number 2, I don't have money for this. You have a little control over that because maybe you can negotiate and bring it down. Time, I don't have time for this. You can control that by saying, hey, then let's meet in 3 months. And then trust is the number 1 thing you definitely have control over, because those little signals that you give to a prospect will help you build trust. Do you reply to emails promptly? Do you spell check your emails so that they're flawless? Do you write short, quick emails? Do you have conversations that work and use the language that they use? Let me keep going, because I want to talk about one of the more important things here, using mind mapping to understand your prospects. This is based on research done in the 1970s. I've adapted it and turned it into something called mind mapping. And it's basically understanding the personality traits of the people you're speaking to so that you can be sure to talk to them. Now, there are basically 4 different kinds of personalities. This is different from communication. This is about how your brain thinks. There's analytical people up in the upper left. Bottom left is sequential people. Upper right is imaginative people. And bottom right is interpersonal people. This is how your brain thinks about things. It's not your communication style, it's how your brain thinks. So in the chat feature, write down your first and second most likely way your brain works. For me, I'm imaginative and interpersonal. We've got imagination and analytical and imaginative. Great. Most people are going to lead with one and then have a secondary one that they do too. Now, here's what's interesting about this. This, again, is understanding yourself and how your brain thinks and solves problems. But you also have to understand the people you're talking to and how they are. So if you're interpersonal, you're helpful and expressive, going left to right. If you're analytical, you're logical and data oriented. If you're sequential, you're organized and detail oriented. And if you're imaginative, you're conceptual and see the big picture. Now, here's the thing. If you're talking to somebody, you have to understand how their brain works. So you can use these things. If you're talking to somebody who's analytical, you would use words like logic, analysis, facts, quantitative. If you're talking to somebody who's highly organized and sequential, you'll use words like organized, step-by-step, plan, detailed. Interpersonal, you'll do feelings, teamwork, culture, partnering. Imaginative, you'll use words like vision, strategy, innovation, global. These are the words you'll use. I once went into somebody, I was making a presentation to him about all the initiatives we'd done with the big brands we were talking about. I had all the logos of the brands on it. Now I'm a visual person, so I love logos and I love what they represent. And we had all these brands on there and it was really impressive. And I realized the person I'm going into is highly analytical. They could care less about the logos, the brands. What they want to know is the data. So I switched it over to a spreadsheet and just showed them on a spreadsheet what we'd done with each one of those brands. The meeting went great. And it was simply because I understood how their brain works and knew they were analytical and said, I'm going to do this the way their brain works, not the way my brain works. So again, that's that kind of thinking backwards and doing from that. So here's what you do if you're in a meeting and you have a bunch of people in the room and you don't know what kind of brain they have. You do your presentation, then you get into the facts so that you're hitting up the analytical people. What are the facts behind the situation? Then you move on to step 2, which is, how do we feel about this? How is this going to impact our staff and our employees? Then you move on to step 3, which is where you're talking to the CEO. Does this match our strategic goals and objectives? And then you end up with step 4, which is what are next steps? So if you use this process, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can hit everybody in the room and make sure that you address what they're most interested in. So let's do a quick recap as we round the bend. Then I'm going to turn it over to Ashley to see what questions we want to have me answer. Mindset first, then we moved up to mentoring, how to talk one-on-one to somebody. Then we moved down to the bottom right, which is management, what you tell yourself in order to lead a team. And then upper right, which is marketing, what you tell other people one to many, and that helps you understand it. So here's the questions we started with. How would you like to change your business life? Would you like to get the promotion? Would you like to win the new client? Would you like to lead teams more effectively? Everything that we talked about today can help you accomplish all of those things as you go through your career. So I hope this was helpful to you. They put in my Emory email address into the chat feature, so feel free to email me there. You can also Google me. I'll be on the first page of Google all over the place. It's just Jamie Turner, Jamie, and you can click through to any one of my websites there, or you can email me at jamie@jamieturner.live, or use my Emory email that was shared previously. Thank you very much, David. Glad you liked it. I'm glad everybody seems to have responded well to this. Ashley, let me turn it over to you and let's talk about what questions you want me to address. And let me let you kind of wrap up and do a summary here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. This has been amazing. I think we've had a lot of interaction from the folks in the audience and on chat and in questions. A lot of people asking for the slides. One question that came up a couple times, just in various formats, was about how this, what leadership looks like during the pandemic, and especially having meetings on Zoom where you have a chat sidebar and people can get distracted and have sidebars that are not part of the full meeting or direct messages. How do you as a leader kind of corral that, if you will, and make sure that you're not creating a toxic team culture or really still meeting everyone's needs?
Yeah, let's address two things there. One is the toxic team culture is difficult. It's a larger issue. It starts with trust. There is a great book out that I might encourage you to read if you find yourself in a somewhat toxic culture. It's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, I think is the total name. It's on my shelf over here if I can see it. Can't see it right now, but it's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it actually does a great job. And it starts with what one of the people mentioned, which is trust, starting with trust. Read that book. It'll teach you how to accomplish those things. But here's how to keep people engaged via Zoom, because we're all meeting from home nowadays. And sometimes you do it. You may have noticed that I did a couple of things in here. One is I made sure that you were interacting with me via chat so that we were having a conversation that keeps you engaged. The second, I called out your names. I always mention your names and things, so that keeps people listening. But also more importantly, I went in and I had quizzes and I had mental exercises, all strategically placed at certain points throughout the presentation where I knew after people listen for about 10 minutes and then they start getting distracted and they look outside and they look at the pretty weather or the dismal weather today. And then you got to bring them back in. So that's why I have those quizzes and those fill in the blanks things. So a lot of times you can ask people questions, call them out by name, have quizzes in there. Or here's another one, ask somebody to summarize what it is you just said. So a lot of times you got to give them heads up. Hey, Barbara, I'm about to go through something that is important. And at the end of this, I want you to tell me what you hear and your perspective on it. That reels Barbara back into the presentation. I hope that helps. Let's see, we probably have a time for one or two more questions, but let's go.
Yeah, Jamie, we'll do one more quick question and then we'll close. And for everyone still on the call, you can see Jamie's email there and feel free to reach out to him. We also will keep all of the questions that have come through and see if we can't answer some on our LinkedIn page as well afterwards. So just a final question, Jamie, what's the number one mistake you see leaders make?
That's a great question. I'm gonna answer that. And Ashley, I'm gonna address two quick things that came up in chat. One from Gary and one from another person who was asking about stagnation. Gary said, did you have enough time to do everything? No, this is about a third of the entire presentation. It's actually a 3-hour presentation. So there's much more to this behind this. And so there's a lot going on here. Somebody asked also about stagnation on leadership. That happens to all of us. What I do when I start feeling like I'm solving problems the same way is I actually have to get out and change my physical environment. So that may be mean just as simple as working at a Starbucks or a Longhorn and all that sort of stuff, just to shake things up, but do things to shake things up. change the time of day that you get in, start exercising, change when you exercise. All of that stuff will make your brain sort of open up. But number one, I'm serious about this, attend things like this because it opens your brain and starts doing things. Let's talk about the question you had, is the number one mistake most leaders make is maybe goes back to that stagnation issue, which is they start solving problems the same way over and over and over again. And that's bad for the organization and it's bad for you as a leader. So the number one thing is to get out of stagnation, and you can do that most easily by reading, attending things. Also, by the way, I do a mastermind group where I sit down and I have conversations with people, and the sharing that goes on between those groups of people is really, really fresh and helps people see things in a new way. So I'd encourage you to get a mastermind group, and it can be informal and done on Zoom. It can be Friday morning at 8, whatever it is. Boom, you get 5 people who have the same problems you do and solve it. So that's great. Thank you for asking that, Ashley.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been, like I said, it's been fabulous. You've provided a lot of really great information. Just want to thank everyone for coming today. We will continue to have business over breakfast. Next week is business in the common good. Does a company have a duty to its country? That's going to be a lot about corporate responsibility and that kind of the social responsibility that companies may or may not have to their communities. And then on March 4th, we will have risk and resilience lessons for quote unquote next time. And we hope you'll be able to join us for those. In addition, we've got a lot of different open enrollment courses that you can check out online. You can visit our website to learn more about these or reach out to us, and we're happy to have a conversation with you. We have a lot of great sessions coming up on emotional intelligence, like Jamie mentioned today, and then some communications, negotiations, finance and accounting for those of you who need a little primer on that, but don't work in it on a regular basis. And then an innovation workshop series coming up as well in May. So thanks again for spending your morning with us. There's going to be a short poll that pops up at the end, and we hope that you will fill it out for us. It helps us plan our upcoming business over breakfast. Enjoy the rest of your morning. And thanks again, Jamie. We appreciate it.